Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us for this episode of Deep Dive. My first question for you is, while the US was engaged in Omani mediated talks led by Jared Kushner, it was simultaneously positioning the largest naval assembly since 2003. Was the diplomatic track a genuine attempt at a grand bargain, or was it a strategic deception operation designed to fix the Iranian leadership's location and lower their guard for Operation Epic Fury?
I think the U.S. was probably genuine in its willingness to not go to war, but less genuine in its willingness to compromise with the Iranian government. They were basically presenting an ultimatum, and they had terms, and those terms could fairly be described as terms of surrender for the Islamic Republic, by which I mean, of course, as has been repeatedly explained, no nuclear enrichment at a military level, no long-range ballistic missiles that can be used for aggression, and no further funding, training, arming, and guiding of militias around the region. Militias which have destabilized the Arab world for many, many decades. Iran was not a country minding its own business, merely oppressing its own people heinously and brutally, having committed a massacre just in the past 2 months of probably tens of thousands of people. Iran was actively destabilizing the Arab world and very clearly threatening the existence of Israel. So the idea of negotiating with them and where it was a negotiation in good faith is a little bit beside the point, when I think reality is that America, in the form and person of Donald Trump, had lost all patience with this basic situation that I have just described. And Iran's choice was more or less to capitulate or to face an attack. So you hear Larijani protesting that they were, attacked in the middle of negotiation. Negotiation is their modus operandi. And they have for many, many decades been negotiating while building up these capabilities. And they seem to think it's okay to have these capabilities. They seem to think it's okay for Iran to set up Hezbollah, which has obliterated Lebanon for decades, that has made a mockery of Lebanon's sovereignty and embroiled Lebanon in ruinous wars, started by Hezbollah versus Israel. They think it's okay for Iraq to be controlled by Shiite militias that are controlled by Iran. They think it's okay for Iran to prop up Bashar Assad, that caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in Syria, and the Houthis that have caused the death of at least 400,000 people in the civil war in Yemen. I think it was game over for Iran. Khamenei and his cabal failed to realize that, and they paid the price. So the negotiations, I think, were only partly genuine in the sense that they were essentially a diktat. Iran rejected that diktat, and that was the outcome of the negotiation. You could argue that the procedure wasn't met properly, and I would agree with you. The way the U.S. carried out this war is extremely problematic in terms of international law. The argument in favor would be that there are points in history where a procedure gets in the way and something decisive has to happen.
And how can the US justify such a drastic military response to Iran's nuclear program when, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, there is no conclusive proof of an active nuclear weapons program? Is this a case of US outreach or a calculated primitive strike?
I don't think the U.S. can particularly justify this kind of action based on a nuclear issue. I just assess that it was not about the nuclear issue. On the nuclear issue, Trump did a classic maneuver where he asked for more than he probably really wants. They demanded Iran does not enrich uranium at all, whereas Iran, as a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, has the right to enrich uranium at civilian levels for the use of energy and research. But Iran is, I believe, the only country in history that was enriching uranium to 60 and 80% levels, which is purely for weapons purposes, while denying they want a weapon, and they've been doing this for decades. So Iran lied about it. That was not relevant today because the U.S. claimed in June to have, I quote, obliterated whatever stockpiles they had and whatever capability they had. And so, yeah, I don't think the kind of action we've seen in the past several days is justified by the American position on Iranian nukes. But I also know it is not about the nukes. And you saw in the past couple of weeks the U.S. trying to broaden the discussion to the ballistic missile program and the proxy militia program. And Iran, in both cases, rejected that. So, in fact, you had a negotiation, you had an American position putting those issues on the table. Those issues are justified, more than justified. Those issues are essential. Iran rejected it. And again, this is the consequence. Now, you have here a rogue regime that does not have the support of its people, clearly, that never did have the support of its people, that only exists on the strength of a falsified referendum in the spring of 1979, and that it massacres anyone who tries to affect change in Iran politically. That's the reality. And this is the outcome, but it's not about the nuclear issue. If we were to isolate it to nukes alone, then you'd be right. America has not a leg to stand on.
Mm-hmm. And despite claims of promoting diplomacy, how can the US continue to push for negotiations with Iran after such a dramatic military escalation, especially when those strikes resulted in the assassination of a key Iranian leader, their supreme leader? And does this move undermine the prospects for meaningful talks?
Precisely because this happened. I believe that Trump would like to further a narrative that says, you know what, we have changed the regime because the Supreme Leader and much, if not most, of his cabal of senior advisors and commanders is gone. So you now have a new leadership in Iran, and with that new leadership, I'd like to negotiate once again, this time testing whether they're going to be less indifferent to my demands. And in this case, even though Trump is a highly imperfect vessel and one of the world's least credible messengers of diplomacy, unfortunately, history has placed him at a juncture where he's right. And he is currently the oracle of trying to get Iran to trying to bring Iran to heel on these issues. And he'd be hoping that the new leadership is going to be more flexible than the previous one was. It's as simple as that.
Mm. And Ali Larijani rejected further talks, while Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi claimed Iran remains open to diplomacy. Does this indicate a burgeoning power struggle and within Tehran between the old guard and a surveillist faction?
Well, first of all, there always was a tension in Iran between the more moderate wing and the hardliners. So we can assume that those tensions will come into play presently. But beyond that, I would tend to discount almost anything said in public under the cloud of war and in the wake of the kind of trauma that the Islamic Republic has suffered in the past 48 hours. So it's not surprising Larijani says there's nothing to talk about. It's not surprising that the foreign minister feels otherwise. And I think perhaps a voice we need to wait for is Pezeshkian, the president. Pezeshkian is a doctor, not a cleric. What passes for a reformist, seems to, live in the modern world and understand what's going on. Probably knows the truth about things, probably understands something basic about history and geopolitics. And who knows, maybe if his voice prevails, then Iran will be open to what can be called diplomacy. But I repeat, I think what really is at hand is something more of a diktat. I don't think they have much leverage to deploy in trying to maintain the right to destabilize Arab countries through militias. I don't know how that continues. And I suspect that demand will remain etched in stone. And it's not impossible that the confidence that the U.S. might bring to bear in such future talks might include a demand for structural change in Iran. For example, very simple things. Anyone who runs for president in Iran has to be vetted by the clerics, the assembly of experts and the supreme leader. There's no reason for that. I mean, the Constitution that was passed in 1979 is illegitimate and fake. I could see the world explaining to Iran that if they want to be welcomed back into the family of nations, that needs to change. And the fundamental guardrails of its theocracy need to be removed. And such a demand would, I think, meet with the approval of the vast majority of Iranians.
Mm. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us here on this episode of Deep Dive. It's a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.